Hi everyone, it's me. Okay, we're gonna do our February wrap up today. It was a short month, but it was a big month of reading. So actually, hold on. We read 16 books. It was a 29-day month and we read 16 books. But to be fair, 6 of those books were novellas, so I think that's kind of cheating. It's not cheating, but like novellas shouldn't count as full books, but like on Goodreads and everywhere else, like they kind of do. So yeah, 6 novellas and 10 full books were read and we're gonna go over them. So I started off this month reading a book called Queen of Roses by Briar Boleyn. This was kind of an arc I received, I think because this book isn't new, but it's the first of a trilogy, and because the 3rd book was coming out this year, I think the author just wanted to send a bunch of people the first book in her series to like get the word out again for her series, like before the 3rd book came out. So that's why I received this as a kind of an arc. But this is an adult romantasy. I'm gonna be completely honest, I don't remember anything about this book. I read it 29 days ago, or like less than 29 days ago, and I literally do not know what happened in this book. So I'm gonna have to reference my little notes here in my phone, so I apologize because I literally forget. This is about a girl named Morgan Pendragon, who is a half fae princess, and she has this brother that's like really cruel and evil, but her brother's the king. Also, faes in this world, like fairies, are like not good. I mean, they're good, but like they're kind of oppressed. The world does not want fae. And so Morgan's half fae heritage, even though she's a princess, is kind of like a bad thing, and it's something that she tries to hide. Her father, who was previously the king before he died, had promised her to these priestesses. Morgan, of course, is like, I don't want to be one of the priestesses. Like, I want to be a warrior and I want to fight. So she's like kind of on the side also like training to be a warrior. Like she's training in combat when one day her brother sends her off on a quest with this mysterious new guard who's tall and brooding and has dark hair, and my hair is in my mouth, but like, you know the type. That's basically the premise of this book. This book I found was just, it was boring. It was a very stereotypical romantasy, and I feel like I love romantasies, okay? I love fantasies with romance, but I just feel like there are way too many romantasies out there these days. They start really mushing together, and these stories and these characters tend to just like not feel unique at all anymore. So I think that's what happened with Queen of Roses. I just was not feeling it. It was kind of boring for me. I had some gripes. What is that word? I had issues with the pacing of this book. We didn't like set off on our quest until 50% way through the book. So the first 50% of the book was just her frolicking around court and like establishing our world and everything, which is always important, but I feel like it was just like the world wasn't deep enough to need that much world building with no plot. And then, oh yeah. And then all of a sudden, it's coming back to me now. At that point in the book, like 80% way through, the book just became very smutty, very randomly, and like not with the person you would expect. Maybe that's a spoiler, but I did not enjoy this book. I apologize. I always feel bad like giving negative reviews to books that I received for free, but you know, I can't lie. Next up, I started my 24 hours of reading romances video, which if you haven't seen yet, go watch it because it's a fun video. But I read romances for 24 hours using the timer method. So I'm going to skim through these really quickly because obviously I've already talked about these books in that video. But I started this challenge by reading a collection of novellas. This is where the 6 novellas comes in, called The Improbable Meet Cute. And this basically was like a Valentine's special. Amazon gathered a group of like popular romance authors to write a bunch of short novellas about Valentine's Day. So it was really fun to read these romance books during the month of love. So just very quickly, the first one was called The Exception to the Rule by Christina Lauren. This was basically You've Got Mail, but on Valentine's Day. So we have 2 characters who accidentally like email each other. They get connected by like a typo on chance. And the first email that is sent was on Valentine's Day. And so these 2 people just decide to carry on the tradition and email each other every year on Valentine's Day for 10 years, until one day they're like, you know what, we've like been connected for so long, I feel like I know you, why don't we just meet? So that was the exception to the rule. It was so cute. I really love this one. It was my favorite novella of the collection, and it was only 100 pages long. So if you're looking for a quick little palate cleanser or fun little romance to read in one sitting, highly recommend this one. The second one was called Worst Wingman Ever by Abby Jimenez. This one I also really like. The premise of this one, we get a lot of mechanic humor, which actually Huffy enjoyed. But it's Valentine's Day, of course, and our main male character has been asked by his brother to leave a note on his girlfriend's car, like a Valentine's Day card. So our main male character does this, but he gets the wrong car because he doesn't know like what his brother's girlfriend's car is. It's like a white Honda Civic or something very generic. So he leaves it on the wrong Honda Civic. And so the girl that actually finds the note is like, I think you left this for the wrong person. This wasn't meant for me. And then they get connected that way. This was also a really fun story, but also like surprisingly very emotional. This was like 60 pages long and like almost got me into tears. The rest of them I didn't really like so much, to be honest, but the next one was called Rosie and the Dreamboat. This was by Sally Thorne. And this was about two sisters who go to a spa for Valentine's Day, where they go into these float tanks, and then our main character gets stuck in the float tank, obviously. So they have to call the firefighters, and then she basically spends her Valentine's Day talking to this firefighter who's like waiting with her while they're trying to get her out of this float tank. And she's like, wow, he has a really nice voice. And yeah, you know, this one was very boring to me and quite cringy. I did not like the dialogue. The fourth one was called Drop, Cover, and Hold On by Jasmine Guillory. This one is set in a bakery, which is so fun. But on Valentine's Day, there is a very unexpected earthquake. Our main girl gets stuck in the bakery with our main guy, who is like the head baker and the owner of the bakery. She has always thought that this guy hates her. He's always given her attitude. And so they just, you know, have to figure out being stuck in a bakery together on Valentine's Day. Don't read this one if you're hungry. Fifth one was called With Any Luck by Ashley Poston. Essentially, this was like The Hangover, but like less vulgar, like a more rom-com-y version of The Hangover. So this one was fun. And then the last one was called Royal Valentine by Sariah Wilson. This was about a princess who wanted to like go undercover for a day because she just wanted to spend a regular day as a regular girl, and she didn't want paparazzi following her around. And so on Valentine's Day, she like goes out in disguise as her assistant, trying to just like live a normal girl's life. And then she meets a guy who shows her around, I think, Italy. Yeah, I think this book was set in Italy. So those were the 6 novellas. I enjoyed the first 2 very, very, very much. And then the others, I was just kind of like, they were okay. So I continued my romance reading marathon and went on to The 7-Year Slip by Ashley Poston. I loved. Okay, I had heard so much about this book previously before reading it, just by like everyone talking about it. And so I came into this book with high hopes, and it exceeded my expectations. It was so good. So this is about a girl named Clementine. I know it's kind of cheesy, but it has significance in the story. So she moves into her late aunt's apartment, and her aunt, like in life, had always been kind of a quirky character, had always told Clementine her apartment was magical. And Clementine, her entire life was just like, oh my gosh, you are being so silly. How can an apartment be magical? I don't believe any of this. But she moves in. She realizes that her aunt was onto something. So one day she goes into her apartment and finds a strange man there. And she's like, who are you? And then she starts realizing that like everything around her has changed. Like it's her old aunt's furniture and not her own furniture. So she realizes that she has traveled back in time, like to 7 years ago back in time, because I'm not explaining this very well. But the apartment's magical ability is that it can take you back in time 7 years. But like only in the apartment. Like if you leave the apartment, you'll go back to current time. But if you stay in the apartment, you'll be 7 years back. And it only happens like once in a while per chance. You can't really control it. But sometimes, yeah, you'll just go into the apartment and you'll be 7 years back. So she goes into the apartment, and 7 years ago, this guy was like living in her aunt's apartment like for the summer. And so she meets him. She's like, what the heck are you doing here? And then they, you know, continue to interact. And this book was so cute. It was interesting for me to read because the first bit of it I was like, oh my gosh, this is so predictable, I know where this is going. But this was definitely one of those like trust the process books, and by the end of it I was like I was like so emotionally engaged. I was so into it. Also, don't read this one while you're hungry because there's a lot of like food descriptions and a lot of emphasis and romance around food because one of our characters is a chef. Yeah, this just got really good. And I'm sure there were a lot of plot holes in terms of like how the magic worked and stuff, but I just don't care. I just don't care because it was such a cute story and it was written so incredibly well. So The 7-Year Slip, I absolutely loved it. By the way, genre was paranormal romance, not paranormal, magical realism romance. I then read Magnolia Parks by Jessica Hastings, which was another very interesting experience for me. I don't even know what genre this is. Like I guess it's a romance, but I wouldn't even classify it as romance because it didn't feel romantic to me. But I think technically it is classified as romance. This is just about rich people in London who just mess around with each other. While I was reading this, I was just getting the impression of Gossip Girl but set in London. That's basically what this book is. And I'm very conflicted on how I feel about this book because on one hand, this book was entertaining. It was highly entertaining. It was very addictive. It had that same addictive quality as like, you know, a show like Gossip Girl or reality TV where you're just like watching these people be like hot messes, but like for some reason you can't look away. That was what Magnolia Parks was for me. I did like partway through this book, I started getting really bored. It just seemed to be the same situations happening over and over and over and over again. And so it got really monotonous around the middle, but then the ending of this book like hooked me back in. So I will probably at some point continue on with the series. I have heard the next book in the series, Daisy Hates, I think it's called, is about another girl, and like that book is actually better than Magnolia Parts. Like her storyline is better than Magnolia's storyline. So I feel like I will continue on with the series at some point when I'm looking for something to like turn my brain off and like just flip through pages of drama. Yeah, I was just very conflicted because I've never been so frustrated at a book and like rated a book so low, but at the same time wanted to keep going. Very confusing experience for me. I don't think it was very well written. I actually found a lot of like grammatical issues and also formatting issues, which was strange to me because I know this book has been out for like at least like a few years because I think there's like 5 books in this series at this point. So I would have thought that like all those kinks and grammatical issues and formatting issues and stuff would have been like fixed by this edition, like by now, but they weren't. I don't know. I turned my brain off and just Magnolia Parks. I then read The Last Letter by Rebecca Yarros, which was the last book I read in my romance readathon, and I don't think I finished this in my romance readathon, so I wasn't able to like give you my final thoughts about it. This is a military romance, and our main male character starts in the military where he receives a last letter from his friend, which is basically like it's such a sad concept, but it's like a letter that is passed on to him when his friend dies in combat. So he gets this last letter, and then his friend's dying wish basically is for our main male character to go to his friend's hometown and take care of his sister, because his sister is like at this point the only one left in his family. And so our main male listens to his friend, goes, and like for context, previously his friend had connected him to his sister through like letters, because you know how like in the army like letter writing is very like it's a thing. Our main male had no one to write letters to. Like he didn't really have anyone growing up. So his friend connected him to his sister as like a pen pal, but like she never really knew his real identity. They used like code names because like you have to be kind of secret in the military sometimes. And so he like fully knows her at this point through letters, but she doesn't know who he is when he arrives, and he doesn't tell her. So yeah, he goes to help her take care of her property and her kids. She has 2 kids. And I found this to be... I had mixed thoughts. This is actually the first Rebecca Yarros book that I had mixed thoughts on, because I usually love Rebecca Yarros's books, and I usually rate them 5 stars. I feel like the characters in this book were not very well flushed out. The story obviously was very good and heart-wrenching and emotional, but the characters were very 2D to me. Our main male character from the military just seemed very main male character from the military with like no unique characteristics. Like his entire personality was just being a military guy. And then our main female character was the same way on the other side. Like it seemed like her entire personality was being a mom. And while like I get that like that was a big part of the storyline, I just wish that she had more of a personality outside of being just a mother. I feel like that would have made her seem more like a real person, but just the way our two characters were set up, it really felt like they were just created as very typical military romance story characters without any depth. And so because of that, I was getting really bored while I was reading this book. But then Rebecca Yarros just never fails to make me sob. So in the last probably like, I don't know, 10% of this book, these events occurred that just made me spiral. I ended up like just not being okay emotionally reading the end of this book, and that's what Rebecca Yarros does. But I don't know, the majority of this book I was very, very bored, and at the end I was very, very, very emotional. So that's why I have mixed feelings. Next up, I read If We Were Villains by M.L. Rio because I needed a break from romance at this point. I was like turning into mush reading all these romance books. So I read a dark academia thriller instead, just the absolute complete opposite. So this book had really, really, really hooked me in terms of the premise for a long time, and I was so happy to finally read it. This was about a guy named Oliver who had served 10 years in jail for a murder that like he may or may not have actually committed. Like even the detective is like, I need to know what actually happened. So he gets out of prison, and the detective that put him there visits him, and he's like, can you just tell me what happened? Like, I know I put you in jail for 10 years, but like, I don't think you did it. So we jump back to 10 years ago to when the crime actually happened. We are set at this like prestigious art school, and our main characters are a group of theater students who are studying Shakespeare. We just, you know, go through the series of events that leaded do I even read? That led to this murder, this death. Doesn't that sound so fun? Yeah, I was really excited to read this, but then right before I opened the book, I opened Goodreads, and I always like open Goodreads just to like mark the book as currently reading. But while I was there in Goodreads, I peeked a couple of the first reviews, and a lot of people were saying that if you liked The Secret History, you are going to like If We Were Villains. And that got me really worried going into it because I actually did not like Secret History. So I was like, if I didn't like Secret History, like, am I gonna hate this one too? But thank goodness, this book was not like Secret History at all. I don't know what these other people were talking about. But If We Were Villains was what I wanted Secret History to be. I feel like if we're comparing the two books, the vibe was obviously very similar. They're both dark academias. We have a group of scholars who are studying this very niche field, and they're like a close-knit group of friends because they're in such like a niche class setting. There's a murder involved like within the friend group, like, so there are a lot of similarities that way. But oh my gosh, it was a world of difference. The pacing in If We Were Villains was so much better. Like it just made so much more sense the way the story was told. I also hated every single character in The Secret History, but not in a good way. And in If We Were Villains, although they were like morally gray characters for the most part, like no one was perfect. They were written in this morally gray way where like you could also kind of like get on certain characters' sides even though you knew that they were kind of like twisted. They were just written in a much more like three-dimensional, fully fleshed way, and that just made literally the world of difference. I think this book is also classified on Goodreads as a thriller. I don't think it's very thrillery. Like if you're looking for that fast-paced thriller, this is not it. It's more lit ficky, mystery, dark academia versus thriller. But oh my gosh, this was so good, and it mixed in like elements of Shakespeare because they were studying certain plays depending on the time of year, and then that was kind of like affecting our main characters' minds depending on like what characters they had to be in. It was so good. I loved it. So that was If We Were Villains. Next, I read The Hurricane Wars by Thea Guanzon, which is, I don't know, it's classified as adult, new adult, and YA fantasy romance on Goodreads, and I would say it's mostly YA except for one smut scene at the end. Like most of the book reads as YA, but then at the end we just get smut. and that's probably why it had to be classified as like also adult. But this was about a nation, an empire that is ruled by like the Night Emperor, I think. Yes, the Night Emperor. And our main character is a girl with light magic. So clearly she's just like the natural enemy of the Night Emperor, and she's kind of from this like lost bloodline with this magic that like no one thinks exists anymore. So she's trying to keep her magic a secret, and she's like in this rebellion movement against the Emperor, and she's an orphan, and you know the story. You know the story. It's another one of those typical romantasy stories. I was kind of back and forth on whether I was enjoying this book or not enjoying this book. I feel like similar to The Queen of Roses, the characters just fell flat for me. They were not very interesting. They were very like 2D paper characters. The world, I think, was trying to be like more complex than it needed to be. The world building, it just tried too hard to be this deeply fleshed out world, but it was all surface level things, so it didn't quite work. There was one moment like near the end of the book where I was like finally starting to really enjoy our main characters and their story. And this book is enemies to lovers, so I think they actually did the enemies to lovers part quite well. It's like a good true enemies to lovers storyline, but most things in this book just kind of fell flat for me, and the ending was very disappointing. The entire way through the book, we were like building up to this one event that like I was looking forward to reading at the end of the book and seeing how things turned out. And then that event didn't even happen in this book. And I understand that this book is the first in a trilogy, but like we didn't actually get an ending to this book, it seemed, and that really frustrated me. Like we had a beginning, a middle, and then the book ended without an actual ending. And so yeah, I don't know, I had mixed feelings about this one. I don't know if I'll continue on with this series. What I've decided to do is I'm gonna like keep an eye on Goodreads ratings when the sequel comes out and just see if people are enjoying the sequel or not, and then I'll like judge then if I want to continue. Oh, there was also some very cringy smut dialogue at the end there, and I'm not even, I wrote down one of the quotes here in my notes, and I'm not even gonna say it out loud. I can't say it out loud, but if you've read this book, you may know what I'm talking about. There's like one thing that he said, and I was like, ugh. Okay, then I read The Woman by Kristin Hannah, which is a historical fiction following the nurses that went to the Vietnam War, and just like how they struggled while they were there, but also struggled when they came back to America, and like no one would listen to them, no one would acknowledge that there were nurses in Vietnam. Like I don't know what was going on. No one was acknowledging these nurses, and this is obviously based on the true events and based on stories of like actual women who went to the war. So yeah, this book just hit really hard. This was also the first Kristin Hannah book that I had ever written. Like I would be able to write a Kristin Hannah book. This is the first Kristin Hannah book that I've ever read. After reading this, I'm like, oh my gosh, I've been missing out. I need to read all of her other books. Stat. That was kind of a nurse joke, unintentionally. But yeah, this book was so good. The writing was incredibly beautiful, so descriptive, so emotive, and it was one of those books that made me like forget that I was reading a book. It really seemed like I was watching a movie and like seeing these events unfold before me, and when I'm reading a book, that is something that I look for, so I really liked that. Wow, like the trauma. Definitely check trigger warnings for this book because they're definitely a lot. Obviously it covers a very serious matter, like a real world war, like in real history. It was so good. Oh my gosh, so many books. Okay, the final 3 books that I read in February were Bride by Hazelwood, Hellbent by Leigh Bardugo, and then Mistborn by Brandon Sanderson. And I'm actually not going to talk about those books in this video. I'm going to be so annoying and not talk about them, but I have a good reason, and it's because I've been filming this video stops when I read a 5-star read. You know, one of those videos where I just like keep reading books until I find a 5-star, and then that video finally ends. I'm in the middle of filming that video and it's not out yet, so I don't want to give you my thoughts on Bride, Hellbent, or Mistborn because those are featured in that video, and if I told you about them now, it would like spoil the whole point of that other video. So I'm not gonna tell you guys about it. I'm sorry, you're gonna have to watch that video to know my thoughts about those 3 books. But I did read those 3 books, and those were the last books that I read in February, which means that's the end of this February wrap up. I feel like that one was a long one. I feel like whenever I film these wrap up videos, my throat gets so dry from talking so much. But anyways, I hope you liked this video. If you did, please leave me a like and a comment. If you don't know what to comment down below, let me know what your favorite book from February was. If you like me, subscribe, do that bell thing, and I will see you in the next one. Bye!